Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me on February 8th for a very special Monday edition of The Locher Room. Tanya Singer is a media executive veteran who has a passion for knitting, teaching, and social justice. Tanya is here today to introduce us to her passion project, Knitting Hope. Knitting Hope gives voice to makers and objects history has long overlooked. Handmade objects, or even the memory of one, can spark a powerful and emotional response even decades later. Knitting Hope ensures that the important role of knitting in Jewish material culture is recognized for the significant impact it has had on the maker and wearer alike. The little red dress is one of the many objects Tanya identified through her years-long research, the culmination of which is this project that shares the ways in which knitting helped women, both Jewish and not, to resist, remember, and renew their lives after World War II. Her piece made its debut today on Modern Daily Knitting in recognition of the 78th anniversary of the Japanese seizing control of the Shanghai Ghetto in February of 1943. I'm so excited to welcome to the Locher Room, Tanya Singer. Hey, Tanya.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. I love the story that went up today. Let's start with knitting. And I believe you were introduced by a sorority sister. Is that correct?
Actually, not a sorority, but a Wellesley sister, my little sister at Wellesley College, and I was pretty hopeless. I had that first scarf that most knitters have that has sort of holes in it and is an odd sort of trapezoid of sorts and is not really wearable. But my dad accepted it gladly, and I don't know where it is now. But it wasn't like needles were put in my hand and this magical thing happened. It was not an easy entry, but we've since gone past that stage.
When your sister introduced you to it, was it something you were kind of looking to do, or it intrigued you? How did where did knitting fit in your likes, let's say?
That's an excellent question. I think that my sense of myself when I was younger was that I was a klutz. Like that would have been the word. Like I probably today would have had OT or PT for motor. Like I just wasn't a motor person. So I think I just said that I couldn't possibly do something that was fine motor. And I think that I didn't see myself as like that's for those people who are really good with their hands. I'm not like this amazing, I'm not great at art. I like art. I love doing arts and crafts my whole life, but I never saw myself as like, whatever I pick up, I can just learn. So I think it was, it's interesting that you're asking that. It's making me think about that. And so for me, it was so much, it had to come from a much deeper place. Like it was more than just like, oh, I can just do that. Like it wasn't a flip thing, and so my first attempt was a fail. And then, I'm in college and college is demanding. So since it wasn't relaxing immediately for me, it was kind of thrown to the wayside and not something that I sort of incorporated into my life as a college student.
Well, I know in our conversation, you were joking about, teaching me and the way you just talked about that. Like I am very artistic, with my eyes, like photography is my thing. Mm-hmm. I cannot pick up a pen. Do not ask me to draw. I will be embarrassed. I will not, so those skills, I would wonder, if that would come natural as well. I also know though, for you, so that was in college at Wesleyan, and then the 2016 election, and then your son Sam had to have brain surgery in 2017 played a significant role in you picking up the needles again. Can you talk about that time?
Yeah, sure.
And how it helped you through that time? Because that's
100% huge. So my son, when he was, I guess in about maybe kindergarten, I walked past my local yarn shop, which has sadly since closed. And I was just so drawn to I've always loved textiles. I've always loved fabric, and I'm a big color, also a visual person like you. And though I'm not a photo whiz, and I was just I kept going past this yarn shop. It was just calling to me, and I didn't know what to do. And I felt embarrassed to go in because I didn't know anything. And then one day I noticed a class schedule in the window, and I thought I could do that. Like I'm a class person, like I'm a Peloton person. I need a person telling me what to do. And if a person tells me what to do, there's like a way higher likelihood of me actually like doing it. So it's like class is the thing. I'm going to do class. And I learned to knit. But then I, as you said, was so involved in corporate, the corporate world and corporate media. And then I was working in political news during 2016, which was all consuming. And literally as like the end of, so 2016, the tough result in November, very stressful time for every human, but then being in media and being part of that and feeling like, what did we do? Like, how did we get this so wrong? So that was pretty traumatic. And then my family went on a December vacation right after that election day. And when we came back, my son had what seemed to be an ear infection, but nothing fixed the ear infection. We thought it was swimmer's ear. We thought ear infection. So within a week, we were at NYU, and thank God the doctor there said, I really think we should order an MRI. Like he's 13. It's like, he's not a kid who's like not involved in school. And thank goodness she did. She found the brain tumor. He needed surgery. And I had this blanket. I was supposed to be like, I started for him when he was in like first grade. And I thought like, how terrible do I feel? I didn't finish his blanket. Like I want to comfort him. I want to give him this blanket in this moment, and I don't have it done. So I brought knitting with me to the hospital. And pretty much from then on, I have knitting. Knitting is like with me at all times. And it became just, forget the motor and the judgments and the whatever. It's like, I knit what I knit. Like I'm knitting at my own pace. I'm knitting what feels comfortable for me to knit, what I enjoy. And it's great. Like when you take that judgment out of it, and you just enjoy it for what it is.
Well, I think that's anything you do. If you do it at your own pace and it's something you just enjoy, the judgment, that's on somebody else. If it's something you're doing for pure joy. And how is Sam today?
Thank goodness. It was a game changer for him as well, which in a good way. So we're very lucky that he went through the surgery, missed a few months of school, but it changed his whole life. He became totally interested in medicine, and he is applying to college now. Hopefully, he's like looking forward to April and having some options. But his plan is to go into medicine, and he's been working in science research. He's just totally into it, as really like that changed his whole life.
Wow. And you really haven't put the needles down since, right?
No. Yeah. Yeah.
Crazy. Do you have a favorite piece? I know.
Okay. So I can't.
Well, and don't tell me who your favorite child is.
Exactly. All right. Well, I just made this cardigan, and I actually made it using, this was so fun. There's so many things. Where should I start? But this is yak yarn. It's a yak blend. It's so warm and so soft. So I love this. And I really wanted it's called the Reluctant Homeschooler, the pattern, which I just thought was the best name. So I was like, well, I have to knit it. Like we're all reluctant homeschoolers.
Every parent right now, yeah.
But I hate to say that in the presence of other knitting. I don't want it to make it feel bad. So I thought instead I would focus on the first sweater I made. And since I spoke about my son, I'll show you. This is my daughter's. This is the first, I'm a cardie. I like the cardie. So this was a sweater I made in that knit shop that was in my town when my daughter was 2. So it's safe in a box. Usually it's like being preserved for I don't know what, but
and will be passed down at some point to her children, I'm sure.
That's right.
How long does something like the one you're wearing take?
This was quick because it's such big yarn. So this was like a few weeks, but sometimes, these things can go on. I kind of time box my knitting. Like I'm not willing to do, there are people who can knit something like so intricate and spend years on it. I always say everything comes out in your knitting, like all your strange personality quirks, like all your, so like, I'm not sure what quirk this is, but it's like, I guess I need completion. And I'm also, there's a whole thing about like, are you a monogamous knitter or not? Do you knit one thing at a time, or do you have tens of knitting projects all over? So I'm pretty monogamous, and I pick something, but the thing is, the thing has to be done in about a month, maybe like 1 to 2 months, and it has to be off the needles. So
just hearing that word with knitting is not something I think I would have ever paired together.
Oh, we got it's a whole culture. There's a lot
Yeah,
of going on. Yeah.
I can tell that's funny. Your other fascination, as we go through today, is with the Holocaust. And I know you are Jewish, but you don't come from Holocaust survivors. Where did the fascination start?
I wish I could know that. I think it's probably because my grandfather, Max, who lived with me as a child, was from Europe, and he lost much of his family. And I was aware of cousins who were survivors, one who ends up factoring into Knitting Hope, which we'll talk about, I think. But I was always aware of Europe. I knew his story. I knew about what life was like. Ironically, I knew about his bar mitzvah, where he read from the Torah and went to his backyard. And I thought, how sad for him. And here I just made my daughter's bat mitzvah in my garage. So it's like a strange, the history is really interesting, and interesting things happen. But I was always felt connected to sort of the old world. And I think it always sort of forced me to think about like what would have been, what could have been. My grandmother was also born in Russia, and she left just after the revolution. So I was aware of like, had they not left, like my family wouldn't be. And I remember as a kid reading historical fiction, Holocaust historical fiction. And of course, every kid my age read Anne Frank. And my favorite Hebrew school teacher, I know it sounds oxymoronic to have a favorite in Hebrew school, but my favorite Hebrew school teacher was an Auschwitz survivor. And I remember seeing the number on her arm. And so it was like it was just in my world, sort of thinking about Europe and knowing survivors, seeing the number. I just had an awareness of it. And so I think as a kid, you start naturally taking that to like, well, what would I have done, and where would I have hidden, and what would have happened to us? And those are scary things to think about as a kid, but it's just sort of, it's just always something that I find myself drawn to. And my kids always ask me like, how can you research this? How can you spend time researching this? And I have 1,000 reasons why, but the main one I tell them is that I'm still learning. Like every day I'm surprised by something about the Holocaust and what happened, or how people rebuilt their lives. Like I just draw so much from it. So I find it just it's like there's so much depth. There's so much there.
Well, I mean, yeah. as a second generation, both of my parents, so I definitely understand. So let's talk about the little red dress of hope. And how did you first hear about this, and this whole story that you share today on modern daily knitting?
Such a happy coincidence. So because of the pandemic, a bunch of college students from my alma mater, Wellesley College, had no internships. Everything sort of blew up for them. So I had the opportunity to work with 4 college students last summer. One of them was from Chicago. And, I have a long list of objects and stories that I've sort of been amassing through my research. And the student from Chicago, Michaela Abrams, said, I'm just going to check out my local museum. And I was like, okay, I really think I found like the stuff that's in the museums, but like, okay. So she checks out her museum and she immediately texts me like, there's this red dress. And it just like immediately pulled her in and pulled me in. And then what's amazing about it, and is told in the story on Modern Daily Knitting, is just like, everything I could imagine that this dress, like it's like beyond my imagination, the whole story, the whole idea of like, wait, how much do we all know about the Jews who went to Shanghai? Like, wait, that's interesting. Like what? So there's that.
I already learned that from you.
Right?
I think I know a lot about, my family from Europe, but that was something I didn't know a lot about.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? That's the thing about Holocaust research, as and again, I don't have the inherited like sort of direct trauma, but there's this term of collective trauma, and I definitely feel sort of like connected to that. And so when I saw this red dress, and one of the first images we had of it was it in the museum, which is on the Modern Daily Knitting site, and you see it. And when I spoke to the curators at the museum and looked at that photo, I said, this is like a beacon of life. Like, you're in a Holocaust museum, you're surrounded by all this loss, right? And here's this red dress. It's like, it's just this, like, it's so defiant, right? It's like, it's not a white little dress. It's like a bright red baby dress, and it's just so alive. And it's 80 years later, and there it is. Like, it's this beacon.
I mean, just the fact that you have something 80 years later from that period of time, you know, just even speaks volumes, because, you know, so many lost everything, not only their lives, but lost, my grandmother just, had a fabric store that she owned in Holland that was, basically taken away from, and, never, didn't get, how to rebuild when they got out. But how did you, what was the first thing you did to learn the story of Judy Fleischer Kolb and that dress?
So, I mean, it was just so amazing. There it is in the museum. The museum, like the Holocaust Museum, the U.S. Holocaust Museum has an incredible archive, and they have tons of things written. The museum in Illinois didn't have anything, so it was like this mystery, and we just wanted to like keep getting in there. Who can we talk to? So they were so lovely. I know a lot of people in that museum now, and it's so accommodating. Like
on a first name basis.
Oh yeah. So we spoke, my intern, Michaela, and I spoke to the education department. We spoke to the curatorial department. We spoke to the marketing department. And then we said, we would really love to speak with Judy Fleischer Kolb. Like, how special that she is here and can speak to her experience in Shanghai and her bond to that dress, and that she schlepped from Shanghai to San Francisco to Illinois, right? Like, that dress has always been a thing, and it wasn't just like I have my little baby sweater in a box that no one can play with, right? Like, she kept that red dress safe. It wasn't a plaything. It was a special object, treasured object for her. And so that was, I mean, she has been incredible. She just speaking with Judy and she is such a historian. I mean, many Holocausts, what I have learned about many families with survivors, and I imagine that you have a similar experience, is sort of like a Holocaust box or a Holocaust drawer where papers and that sort of thing get kept. But Judy kept there's just so much more. She saved everything. She still has this unbelievable dress, which I mentioned in the story, that her grandmother Martha knit for her. It's like a Chanel. It is so gorgeous. I would love in my lifetime to knit the kinds of things that her grandma Martha knit.
And this is Judy with her family, right, in Shanghai?
Yes. So that's her mom. So there's Judy in front, and there's her mom Carla next to her mother Martha. So that's the knitter who knit the little red dress.
That's crazy. And then this is the dress again.
Yeah, she's seated in the dress. And it's amazing. So I didn't connect that until I spoke to Judy, which is what's the power of getting to speak to somebody directly. She said, that's the red dress in the picture. And I said, but it doesn't look like the one in the museum, which has these buttons. She said, they hung it backwards. So I was like, so then I called the curators back. I said, the original team that curated the exhibition, the dress needs to, when you please flip it for like Martha, like as a knitter, I'm like, please.
Right. It should be, it's traveled a very long way to be, hanging the right way.
But it's incredible. I mean, you don't know that until you really dig in with the person who knows that story better than anyone, and just how fortunate to have Judy as a resource and be able to ask her, like, how else would anyone have known? How no one would have known that photo was there, because that's her in that dress.
I know you talk a lot about it in the article that you wrote, but can you share a little bit of the history of Judy's family and how they ended up in Shanghai?
Yes.
She was born in Shanghai, but her family escaped Germany and
yes.
went to seek refuge there.
Yeah. So So Judy's family were German Jews. They had been, they identified as Germans. They spoke German. They were immersed in German culture. They didn't like sort of feel that they were in some sort of segregated, they felt normal. They felt part of everything. They weren't like off kind of in their own enclave. And they owned a fabric store. So like your family, that Jewish textile bond is strong. And they had this fabric store, and in November 1938, there was this terrible event called Kristallnacht, and that was really like this flashpoint. And from that moment on, the Nazis sort of really, their program of sort of developing the final solution to the Jewish problem, as they called it, really stepped up. And that's when they, that moment was the point where they turned the Hitler Youth loose and the SS loose on the German Jews. And businesses were destroyed, synagogues were burned, Jews couldn't own their businesses. Like, it was a terrible moment. And Judy's grandfather, Martha's husband, was taken. Many men were arrested, mostly men were arrested. He was taken and later released, thank goodness. And Martha had her wits about her. And I mean, how she even imagined, she just said, this is really like, I got to do something dire. And without her husband, like a woman in 1938 was very resourceful, sold the fabric, like just sold it all, liquidated everything, because there was rumor in Germany that like the last port, you could still get a visa to Shanghai. It was the last open port in the world. And she liquidated their stuff to buy tickets, and that's all they had. And the Germans even capped how much money you could leave the country with. You couldn't bring your jewelry. You couldn't bring any fine, special candlesticks. You couldn't bring anything of value. So you're stateless. You're like nothing, right? And you're leaving for this country where you don't know the language, and you pretty much have the clothes on your back and one suitcase. And Judy's mom, Carla and Judy's dad were just married. So this was their honeymoon, which sounds sort of, that's an odd word to even think about in this context. So this was it. Like, this was their getting away. But, as you see in the story, and as we know, when we look at Shanghai, I mean, while it was like the conditions were deplorable and it was terrifying, like they really were so lucky. And it really was because of Grandma Martha and her. She's the one who sort of said, like, we're getting out, and she was able to make it happen.
Wow.
Yeah.
And do we know what year the dress was made?
I'm thinking like 39, 40 in there. The photo that we have says circa 1940.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
And the conditions, you even talk about, that the conditions there were, horrible, what Jews faced in Shanghai. Can you talk about some of those conditions? Absolutely.
So first, when the Jews first got there, they had, before the Japanese seized control, like there have been Jews in Shanghai, like Sephardi Jews have been there for some time conducting business and so on. So it wasn't like always terrible. And there was, in the beginning, an opportunity to have what felt like almost normal, like one of those Sephardi families created a school for the Jewish kids, so they had some structure and had some education and normalcy. They called this section of Shanghai Little Vienna. They had cafes, they had dance halls. They tried to make it normal. They brought European culture because, again, they really saw them like it was really German, Austrian culture that they brought with them. There were some Russian Jews as well who came, but in much smaller numbers. So the majority, sort of the dominant culture, was that Little Vienna sort of feeling. And it wasn't until the Japanese, it's like, we don't think about like the Pacific Front and what was happening. It's, at least for me, it's like, my brain just goes to like, Western Europe and Eastern Europe, and that's where we think. But you think about, like, of course, Japan had invaded Manchuria. Japan was like really waging war with China, and Japan seized control of Shanghai, which was an incredibly lucrative port. And the Japanese were amazing. They didn't have the history of anti-Semitism. It was not, which is hard to think about, it was not a cultural point of reference in the way that in Europe for centuries, right? There's been this deeply entrenched anti-Semitism. It didn't exist. Like the Japanese didn't understand when the the Nazis sent somebody and said, we want you to do something about your Jews. And they even said, here's how we want you to liquidate your Jews. And the Japanese were like, we're good. Like we're not going to do that.
Well, so, I also don't think it's a story that's like, I don't, I guess because my family's European, people taking refuge in Shanghai is not something you commonly really heard stories about, I don't think, or not in my world. I don't,
No, and I think it's important now, there's this sort of, as we think about identity, even in the Jewish world, right? Like there's this word Ashkenormative, right? Like everybody's Ashkenazi and everybody fits into this box and you're from this slate of countries. And that's not, like, Jews are as multicultural as every other group. And we come from pretty much every continent. I wouldn't know about Antarctica, but maybe. And, where
until you do your research.
I'll get there, but that would be fun if there's a shul in Antarctica that wants to talk.
Well, I really love that you got to hear a lot of this from Judy in her own words, which is really I think it's so special when you really can hear from someone directly who sort of, she didn't live through the war, but was born right, at that time, really young too, really young child during all of that, and then ended up here in the US. But she donated it to the museum, right, in 2009.
Yep. Yeah, she had this dress, and a friend in Chicago said, they're opening this museum, they're looking for objects, and she had sort of her papers, and then she somehow thought about, like, maybe that dress would be good. And she's just unbelievable. She has, just today, she sent me more photographs of Grandma Martha, who worked at Levi Strauss, which I just love. So when they got to San Francisco, she worked for like the most iconic American brand you could think of, for like a seamstress to get a job at Levi Strauss. So they have family photos of them at Levi Strauss on the factory floor. Like it's incredible. Like Judy just has this like trove of amazing. She's a real historian. She's really like kept her
saving those things are, I think just us talking about it, for anybody listening, there are certain things that don't get rid of. It really is there's an importance to sharing that. I've learned it later in life too. I'm sure my parents we didn't save things, and it took me a long time to fully understand what they lived through, and just sharing their story, how important it is to do so. Judy, her story is now going around to different schools, 1,200 students a day or per month, right?
Yes.
Tell us about that, because that's incredible too, that it's not just there in the museum.
This is the power of this dress. It's like it has its own life. It really has its own life. So Judy donated the dress. She's a volunteer at the museum, and apparently the docents were so taken by it. And you can see that this doesn't really match the original dress, but it doesn't matter. And I love that. I love that the museum didn't feel that it doesn't have to be a replica to provide like a forum for really important, difficult conversations with kids. And they had this teaching trunk program, and they thought, like, what if we put these dresses in? So there are 15 of the 60 dresses that the docents just made because they wanted to, are being sent all over the country. And it's, having done a lot of teaching with kids myself, there is nothing like an object. Everyone can relate to like a beloved teddy bear or blankie or something, like a hat, like something your grandma made for you or your mom made for you, that special thing. And that immediately, what the museum said, the ed department said, is that they deal in flat objects all the time and black and white all the time. And so it's easy for us to distance ourselves and say, well, that was then. But when you have a bright red dress in front of you, it's kind of like, oh, there were kids. Like, wait, this is like what? So it's sort of like you drop your guard a little bit, and you immediately connect with the human, like it puts a human face to, these dizzying numbers that
Yeah.
people can't connect to.
Yeah. Well, for me, not to go into my family story, but there's like two moments in my life for my to understanding what my mother had gone through, and one of them is the color moment in Schindler's List, which is only one color moment of the girl in the red coat.
Yeah.
A black and white movie, and there's only the one little girl in a bright red coat that we all see walk like in the middle of a street. And it, like, it that power of that color is something. So Knitting Hope was born out of this whole research project. Before we get fully into Knitting Hope, how long did it take you to, how many times did you speak to Judy? What was the genesis of putting the article together?
Okay, so Judy, I'm so lucky that she is like Zoom. She can hop on a Zoom. She's like the best. She's a great emailer. She's just like, she's on it. She's amazing. She, having been a volunteer at the museum, like feels very strongly about Holocaust education and has been so gracious in allowing us to share her family's story. She in fact said, and I sent her the story before it ran, and she said, she was moved by it and said, I wish I could show it to them. And I said, I kind of feel like maybe they know, like maybe they're like, I just have this good feeling that like, wow, if her grandmother knew that her dress was being sent, copies of her dress were being sent, and that other people were moved. And I think especially in this moment, like what's so special about Judy and her story, it's like, we're living through a tough moment now. And Judy's whole thing is like, your heroes are right in front of you, like your family, right? Your heroes are right here, and you can choose how you write your own story. And her whole, what moves me so much about her is like, she didn't know her life. She was, those conditions were bad. And what she's made so clear to me is like, her family made it so special and so good. And there was so much love. And she said, if they were struggling and they were upset, I didn't know it. Like, I don't know. I can't say that I've been so great about not showing my kids my anxiety in this moment about
the world we're living in now. Yeah, I'm sure. Right.
Tough. It's tough. And that they
completely.
Right, that they were able to do what they did and leave everything with the language. I mean, she tells these stories of like her grandma running next to a rickshaw because everybody was destitute, right? So like people try to steal stuff off your rickshaw. They had a transportation company. She's just like this grandma running next to the rickshaw to like keep people away, like just
kick them away.
I love that. So so there were multiple conversations with Judy, and she's just terrific.
So tell us about Knitting Hope, because what your mindset is and what made you realize in talking with her the importance of objects like these that helped women during that time to resist, remember, and renew their lives after the war.
Yeah, I guess so. I had I've been at this for almost 2 years, and I only learned about Judy this summer. So Judy has come sort of into this research, but I started because there was a story in Moment magazine a couple of years ago that was about a girl in a blue sweater. Her name is Helena Weinrausch. She's a ballroom dancer in her 80s. She's like this stunning, amazing, exuberant person who has been to hell and back, right? Like she has, I won't even get into it, but she's had a very tough life, and she's found joy, and she's created so much joy in her life. And this writer Gail Dubov went to a Seder a couple of years ago, walks in, and there's this like amazing woman there, full of life, beautiful, made up, wearing this like electric blue sweater. And she asks about the sweater, and she says, I've worn this every Passover Seder for 75 years. And it was knit for me by a friend who also survived the war. And we weighed like 85 pounds after the war. We were in a displaced persons hospital in Sweden, trying to be nursed back to life. And this friend knit her this blue sweater. And she said, wear it to remember them. And when I read that story, I couldn't get it out of my mind. And then and in the story, it said that her friend Anne probably knit to survive, that she knit for Nazi wives. And I'd heard of, because I have this odd Holocaust, So I know that people sewed. I know there were seamstresses and tailors who were knitting for Nazi like couture gowns, right? Like I know about that. I know about like recipes that have been discovered in books of recipes. Like, but I thought like, wait, was knitting a thing? Because as we said, you know, in my trauma, in my worst trauma of my life, when I was afraid of losing my son, it's like it was automatic. I didn't have a choice, and I still now it is like, if I don't knit, I'm a little grumpy. I need my knitting. So thinking like, you know, this is such a human drive to create, and this is my medium. But like, did people do this during the war? And then one of the next things I found was like knitting needles that somebody carved out of the barrack in Auschwitz. Like, it's like it's like this innate human drive to create, which in the case of the Holocaust, as you said, it's like it also helped people survive, helped people resist. Like there's just I have a trove of stories. It was hard to
Well, that's
even
the thing.
Yeah.
You talked about your son and the election. I mean, all of that's traumatic, and you know, doesn't matter if it was 1910, 1940. You know, trauma is trauma, and if there's something that can sort of take you to a place that, you know, sort of, I don't know, blocks that for even, you know, however long you do it. It really sounds like it was something, you know, you needed and people during the war needed, for sure.
Yeah. And there, I mean, you'll love this. There's a woman who was like an amazing knitter, Maddie Gerard, and she ended up knitting dresses, crocheting and knitting dresses for Dionne Warwick and Pat Nixon and other celebrities. She was like a high-end knitwear designer. So yeah, I love that. I love that she went from, I remember when I was in college and went to Yad Vashem for the first time, and my tour guide was a seamstress, and she made wedding dresses in Jerusalem. This little tiny lady, right? And she's making these big wedding gowns, and I thought like, like that's poetic. Like, how terrific that she is like launching people into this new chapter of life. Like she's not looking back, or she is probably, it's with her, but she's able to bring joy into the world and be part of giving people joy. So yeah.
That's incredible. Well, and also with the story that you released today, it includes a link to a contemporary Little Red Dress knitting pattern that was designed by Melissa Shinsato. Did you ask her to create this for what you were doing?
Yes. So Melissa is my partner in all things knitting. I actually kind of adopted her after my son's surgery. She taught me to crochet, and I was like, "You're my person." So this is the Little Red Dress that Melissa designed. Melissa has just like, she's got such an eye for detail. Her knitting is so exquisite and detailed, and you can see the little scalloped collar and just the beautiful way the sleeves are set in, and this butterfly pattern.
It's so beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, she did an incredible job, and it's in this amazing red wool that we got from some indie dyers in Illinois. And it was funny, after she designed it, it was like, there's all these, this is what I mean about the layers and the depth in all of this. I thought about I Never Saw Another Butterfly, the poem from Terezin. I'll send it to you if you don't have it.
Yeah, please do.
It's like one of these pieces of children's poetry that survived. Of course, the child did not survive, but it's like, oh my God, the dress has butterflies. Like, we didn't even like
plan it that way.
There's just so many things that just keep happening. And then the dress on the back has these exquisite buttons, because again, like, it's these little details. I don't know if you can see it well.
Yeah, I mean, I can see. Well, on this, from the trunk.
Yes. Yeah. So those are kind of what the buttons on the original look like. They sort of look like a wood. It's hard to know what they are. They're probably wood. And this is a crocheted version that one of the museum docents created along with Judy's family's paper. You can see Martha Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Carla
I just love that it travels to schools as an education piece. I mean, so much history in that. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. So to foster community, you're doing a knit along on Facebook, you know, all week. What is that like? Have you done that before where people are knitting?
Yes, I have. Actually, so during the pandemic, there's an amazing yarn company called Knit Collage, and I was really having trouble. I keep saying everything comes out in your knitting, like all of the stuff you may not even realize is happening to you, like when you sort of have to face your frustration in your art. And I was having so much trouble when the pandemic started, and I kept saying, I'm fine. I'm really fine. I'm great. I'm fine. We'll get through this. I'm fine. I was trying to be really optimistic, and my knitting was a mess. Like I couldn't knit anything. And I was like, what is going on here? Why is my brain, what's happening? So I joined a Knit Collage knit along, which ended up like, I made this super chunky sweater using some amazing yarn that she made. And I was like, okay, now I'm back on track. Now I'm back in the zone. And I see how important that community can be. It was so important to me to get me feeling like, okay, I got my mojo back, like I can knit again. And I know a lot of knitters felt that way. I think even after, George Floyd came to light and there was this terrible time this summer, a lot of knitters felt like I can't knit, which is like, that is our source of like so much joy and calm, and to not be able to knit is a terrible feeling. So I know how powerful that community can be. And I will say that our knit along is a knit optional knit along because I don't want to just limit it to knitters. I want friends of knitters to be there too. So they don't have to listen to all the knitting stuff, and we're going to separate that out. But so if people want to knit along with us, awesome. If people just want to hang out, we're going to have chats with Judy Fleischer-Kolb. We're going to have some other surprises along the way. So how special, like when does one get the opportunity to knit something and feel so connected to a story, and then meet the person who wore the thing? It's incredible.
Well, so, and to have her do this with you is even, wow, I didn't know that. That's like,
she's amazing.
Just having that history that you're able to really still, have somebody from that time, because, as we know, as the years go by, we're losing the true history from World War II, and telling those stories. I wish we didn't have to say that it is still so important, but it's even more so for some reason today, sadly, in our country where, it didn't happen like it did in Europe and in Shanghai and all of those places. But, we have to keep telling these stories so people understand what happened.
No, you're doing such great work in that. I mean, I love your interviews and what you're sharing.
Thanks.
It is so important. And even my own kids were like, well, that was then. And they see now. And I wish they didn't have to see now. I wish they didn't have to accept this was part of our reality, but it is. And so we have to be brave and share the stories and make sure that this never happens again, and that we do better now with systemic racism and all the other forms of, there's just too much hate.
Way too much hate. What's your biggest hope for what people take away from Judys Story and your piece that is out today on Modern Daily Knitting?
I hope that it gives people the same feeling of hope that it gave me, that that spark that I felt when I saw the picture of it in the exhibition. And I said, like, here in the middle of this Holocaust museum, in this darkest time that I can think of in recent memory, right? Like here in this very dark moment, there's this defiant bright red dress. And unlike the Schindler's List, not to spoiler alert, this little girl lived, this dress had a life beyond the war. And what a great triumph that is. And it's like, you always see photos of survivors and their families and their grandkids, like it's like a defiance, right? It's like, we made it. And you're one of those, you're that, right? And it's like, they didn't take everything. They didn't take everyone. And like, life can go on and we can rebuild. So I hope that it gives us also courage in this moment. And what I'm hoping to do is share more of the stories and collaborate with all different designers and make it clear that, like, to me, this isn't a Jewish knitting story. This is like a human story. And we have things we need to correct in our world right now. And I would love to work with designers of all different backgrounds.
I mean, the knitting isn't relegated to the Jewish community. It is everyone.
Right.
I told her, one of my best girlfriends is a knitter, and I shared this, that we were doing this today, and she was so excited. And I told her what you had said to me about getting me to knit. She said, "Oh my God!" She's like, she was ready to have another knitting friend.
I'm ready.
She was like, "I can always use knitting friends." So she does it all the time. She shares on Instagram what she it's great. I mean, people, I can tell, you can tell it's something, I think, once people do get into it, how much they love it. And you teach it, and you teach it to children and adults. How did that stem about?
Yeah, so after this sort of turning point with my son and his surgery, he was home for 3 months, not had terrible headaches. And so when he was up for it, we watched TV together, and we were watching a Michael Pollan documentary about food insecurity. And I didn't know anything about food insecurity. I mean, I knew about food pantries, and I knew, right? But I think even today we're so much more aware, particularly in the pandemic, of how many people have so little, and how much just miles from wherever we live in our nice cozy homes, there are people who have nothing, have no food, can't make it through a month. Even with government support. And so there was, in this documentary, Stephen Ritz, the founder of Green Bronx Machine, was featured. And I just was like, it was one of those moments, like, I have to know about this. I have to be part of this. And so I took out my laptop and emailed him as I was watching the movie, and was like, I need to help. I need to be part of this.
What's the documentary called?
In Defense of Food.
In Defense of
I think it's In Defense of Food. Yeah, Michael Pollan, he's a big food writer, and he looked, it's great. It's like, why do we have a food desert in America? How is this possible in a country with so much? And we're so high-minded about our democracy and all, like, we have such a great opinion of ourselves and our role in the world as a beacon and leader to others. Like, why do we have people starving? Why do we have kids who are going to face disease at such young ages that are caused by, have all these poor health outcomes because they don't have proper nutrition as children? It's like, how is this okay in our country? And so I got involved in Green Bronx Machine, and I became a board member. And as you can tell, when you know me, I'm a knitter. It's like pretty quick. I don't hide it for long. And Stephen said, "Could you teach the kids to knit?" And I was like, well, this is interesting. Like, how would I do that? How would I teach, like, elementary school kids? Because again, I had this sense of myself as a child as like, the motor, and how am I going to do this? And I read some books and was influenced by some amazing people who were passionate about teaching kids, and sort of started to form my opinion. And then I reached out to a company called Loopy Mango. I'll show you this yarn. It is like, this is a discontinued color. Everybody starts with this yarn. It's like my traffic cone orange. I love it. And it is like the best. I'm going to get you some.
Are they interested?
So it's just amazing. The program, the kids at Green Bronx are so, I brought several volunteer knitters from my community to come work with me so we could give the kids more attention. Everyone was like, these kids are so engaged. They're so respectful. They're so, like, open to people coming in and working with. They're so appreciative, and they loved it. They loved the orange yarn, and it's so fun. It was so much fun. And so I worked with them quite a bit until the pandemic. They wanted more knitting. So it was like, okay, more. We got to, like, let's we'll come like on a regular basis. And unfortunately, the pandemic came, and it took me quite some time to sort of come around to Zoom. And I think knitting on Zoom with children under like 12 that's my experience. It's very hard. It's very hard because when you're teaching knitting, just like me with my trapezoidal Swiss cheese scarf that I made, you're always sort of, I never use this word with students, but you're always battling frustration tolerance, right? And so, like, how much frustration is this kid or student going to feel before they're like, I'm good, I'm out, right? So, like, I never want the frustration to be so great that they give up. I want them to have enough success that they are going to, like, get to that place where it's, like, rewarding and joyous. And
do all knitters start with a frustration?
Oh my gosh. And I tell students all the time, like, there's not a single project, like it's a fantasy. You dream of a project that you cast on, you start the project and you just magically make it and there's no drama. There's always something. There's always like, whoa, I was knitting and watching Netflix and what did I do? I have to rip this part out. But the beauty of knitting, my son's a big baker and I always joke like, you can't unbake it. Like if you've made a mistake and you left out a key ingredient, it's like, it's too bad, it's done. When I knit something, like if I don't like it, I take it out and I tweak it until I feel good about it. So it's forgiving. It's like most of life you don't have that do-over built in, but you do in knitting. And so that really sort of drives my philosophy as a teacher is to like, you want to give students success early. And even if someone thinks like there's debates, right? People are like, give them a sweater, give them a sock. I'm like, no way. Like, I don't want to lose to frustration. If they just they really don't like it, they really don't like it. But like, if the frustration is what's turning them away, then I feel like I've done it.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want the frustration to be the cause. I mean, it should be knitting, whether, decide whether you like knitting or not just because you can't get that stitch, if that's what it's called. What if somebody was watching and they, from our conversation, just what would be your first recommendation to learn if somebody wanted to?
So I am a big fan of bulky yarn. I have these huge needles here. These are called a size 19 US. Like a lot of experienced knitters wouldn't dream of picking these up, right? And I love the bulky or super bulky yarn. And I would start with that. I would start with something big because again, you want success right away. Melissa and I, through our lesson Business You Can Knit, have published some patterns for beginners. I think they're free. We have like the super easy neck warmer that all our kids make, and they use these super fun buttons on them, and like it's so quick and they feel like $1 million because like they knit this thing and they have this cool cozy.
They've accomplished it.
And they're making choices, right? They're making choices about the color, they're making choices about the buttons and how they want to style it. So it gives them a feeling of control and agency, and they're designers. It's great. So we start with that, and then we get them to a hat, and then the hat is where they start to get like they're on fire. They love it because the hat, we don't knit with these needles. We knit with needles that are connected, and you knit in a circle, and that's that's like the gateway to like all kinds of fun adventures in knitting. Actually, these aren't the needles I use with kids, but like this idea of a needle that's in a circle.
Well, I can only imagine. I mean, kids, to work on something that's sort of difficult and takes time to do, and then to walk away and put that hat on that they made and walk around with it, I'm sure is a game changer for them.
I have a 4th grade boy that I teach who is like, he sent me a text through his mom. He's like, I created an icon for myself. It is his pink hat. It is like the brightest pink ever with a black super puffy pom-pom, and he's like, the hat is basically me. Like it's like, I love you. Like
it's his statement. He's walking around. Yeah. That's great. Do your kids knit?
My son knows how to knit, but he claims that he can't. And
hey, I like his choice, though. I have to admit, I like
he lets me knit for him. Yeah, he lets me.
No, but I like the sweets if he's baking.
Oh my God, he's a major baker. He's good. He's really good. He's good. And then my daughter has done so well with knitting. She's worked in my knitting camp this summer, and she's doing great. She made 2 sweaters this year. She's 13, so it's pretty awesome. Like I wish I was making sweaters when I was 13. And we got another 2 sweaters that she's working on. I got to give her a little motivation.
And are you working on something that you're knitting right now?
I will show you my latest yarn. It's so pretty. I don't know. It's like, here's a mohair. I don't know if you can see the.
Is it lavender?
Yeah, it's lavender, and it's mohair and wool together. And again, it's an indie dyer. We love the indie dyers, knitters. We really love them. But it's a dyer called Ritual Dyes, and yeah, so that's going to be a sweater that's designed by Beth McDonald, a designer in Bermuda. So like, I want Beth McDonald to have knitting camp in Bermuda, and I want to be able to go.
So this is a design she made, and you're trying to do that.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what happens. Like somebody puts a design out, and then knitters take it and make it their own. Just sort of part of the
Any idea how popular? I mean, I know it is a popular art. Any idea how? Like,
I mean, I wish I knew the numbers. I know the biggest community for knitting is Ravelry, but knitters on Instagram is huge. Huge to me. I don't know. I don't know what the numbers were, and it's funny because it gets relegated into this grandma, like my kids that I teach are like, we're the grandma squad, and like, it's not that. And there's been such a resurgence. I mean, even Ella Emhoff, what do you call her? The second stepdaughter, Ella Emhoff, Doug Emhoff's daughter.
Yeah. I saw something.
Is like a major.
Didn't she? I feel like she might have just posted something in the last week that I happened to catch because,
Yeah, she's amazing, and she really crochets. And so there's, any fiber festival you go to, it's like it's the whole spectrum of ages and colors, ethnicities.
It's so funny that you said they were calling grandma
squad.
Yeah, because but it is something I think I would have thought of, but not in the last. I definitely see it, and I think Instagram and social media have definitely made me realize that it is not, because like my friend is my age, she absolutely loves it,
Yeah, I mean, and think about 4 years ago, the pink hats that took over, right, the Women's March, and how great was that? That was a couple of knitters who were like, we need a thing, right? And that everybody knows what that pink hat. Except for my fourth grade boy.
Hey, he can be supporting them. He just doesn't know it.
I love it.
That is so funny. So do you have a next research project that you?
I am continuing down the Knitting Hope road. There's still some things, there's some gaps. So I'm really looking, as I said, to be as inclusive as possible. And I'm hoping to find some more objects from, we talked about the Ashka normative idea.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm looking at finding more stories from Jews from places one doesn't necessarily think of right off the bat when we think of the Holocaust. So
if somebody's watching and they go to Knitting Hope, they can contact you if they come across any of these things, right?
Absolutely. So that, and I'm also looking at stories. I have a couple of stories of women who are not Jewish, which you mentioned. Stories of men knitting, like all of it. So just trying to sort of have as full a picture as one can get of the role of knitting and knitted objects.
It's really great. I love what you're doing. Tanya, thank you so much. Please go to knittinghope.com, go to Modern Daily Knitting to check out the story today about the little red dress and Judys Story. It's fantastic. I've had so much fun, Tanya. Thank you so much for being here.
I'll put these in the mail.
I think it scares me. I'm sweating already.
Don't sweat.
It's like when somebody says you want to play Pictionary, and I go running out of the room because I cannot draw.
I hear you.
It really is. It's crazy.
Too funny.
Thank you so much for being here. I wish you all the best with it.
Thank you.
Best of luck.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.
Thanks, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the story. I think it's so important to continue to share stories of hope. The Little Red Dress of Hope is definitely one of those stories. Have a great Monday. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, you can do so right below and turn on the notifications so you hear about every show I have coming up. Have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.